So hi again and welcome to Yesterday Today Sewing, where I take the designs and fashions of past years and incorporate them into my wardrobe. Now what you may or may not know is that I am a bit of a hat girl. If you look up there, that's only some of my hats. You know, I've always got that one over there, and some of the others I'm wearing are out in the other one. But I thought today I might get started on a 1930s, 40s era hat. As you can see, this is a Vogue pattern, and I've been intrigued by this hat and how it gets made. So I thought, well, let's give it a go, especially since my 1930s dress is done. And well, I've got a nice little brown hat that I wear with it, which goes quite nicely with my brown shoes that work with it. It might be fun to have something a little bit different and really classy, especially if we get like a Melbourne Cup type lunch happening at school sometime. I'll have a really fancy hat to wear. So what I have done so far is I've taken the pattern, I've traced it out to make it a little bit easier, and as you can see, I've just started doing some thread marking of the various points on here. That's pinned ready to sew. That one is marked. But now there's this other funny little piece to it that they say do out of a contrast. And because of the way it's gathered, I'm thinking, yes, I will want to do it out of a contrast, not out of the felt, because see, it gets gathered along those edges. And I think the felt will get thicker than what I want, which meant that I've had to think about what sort of fabric am I going to use for that one. And when I was at Spotlight, I found this sort of almost a netting kind of thing, a veiling that you would use for hats. And if worse comes to worse, I could probably use that. What I couldn't find was any sort of, I thought a pretty lace or like a tulle with some sort of design, even a spotty design on it. And do you think I could find anything? So that's why I ended up with that veiling. But then I remembered a bridesmaid's dress that I had made some time back, and I found this little swatch from that. And believe it or not, I obviously was testing out doing the seam on this scrap. Believe it or not, I would probably have just enough to get that one out. So I'm really thinking I might give this organza a bit of a go, because I think that could look quite interesting as a contrast, probably more so than the veiling, which I think is a little bit too wide in its holes and things like that for what it does. Problem is, what I can't really tell on this hat is where exactly is that contrast. Indeed, what have they used as the contrast on their hat? So, well, we'll just see. You know, if I don't like it, I'll take it off and I'll do something else. That's how it goes, isn't it? So what I will do is I will cut out my contrast here. That gets stitched onto there somehow, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Wish me luck, because looking at the instructions, I'm really not sure how this one's going to go. Alrighty, so what I have done is gathered this little piece and attached it to piece 5 like that, and ironed it over like it said. And here I've inserted the wire, as you can see, into this piece here, and then just basted in here like it says there. So now looks like I have to attach this to this somehow, and I think for this I turn that way, there's that rolled edge, and that sits that way, so it'll be these two basted lines get sewn together, I think. Here's hoping. Okay, so I have stitched up along there and ironed it flat. Now it's telling me to edge stitch back and front long seam, breaking stitching at folded end on front, like that. What I'm thinking it's telling me to do is to edge stitch along the top piece there, stop here where the stitching stops at the circle, and then top stitch along this, stop here where this bit folds, and then start again on that last bit. I think that's what it's telling me. I'm guessing that's what it means by this random little thread off the image there. So, well, that's what I'll do. If it's not right, I don't think it'll be the end of the world. Let's see. Okay, so you can see I've done this top stitching through here, stopped it there like I think it told me to, kept on going. Now, here's the next one. It says to fold the front as shown, matching squares, tackle squares. So what I'm thinking I have to do is take those two and fold them to meet those two somehow, so it looks kind of like that. So I'll see if I can get that in a shot so you can kind of see how that goes. I'm really not quite sure what will happen then once we've done that. Maybe the knot will hide some of that messiness. I think this is one case of just try it and trust it will all turn out. Okay, so here we have a square and here we have a square. So by the looks, you sort of pleat those, and probably doing something with this wire might help that. And now those two then somehow meet those two about there like that. I'm thinking that's kind of like the picture suggests. And let's work with this wire here a bit and help it to sit, I think, kind of like it's meant to. And that will probably help it a bit too if I can get that. There we go. Square, square. That sits up there like that. And right, pin it and then tack, I think is going to be the go, and hope for the best. Okay, so that is tacked in place. I'm hoping that's not going to be visible and it has to come out. Otherwise I'm going to be redoing it. My guess is though somehow this gets covered also. Okay, so after tacking that, it just gathers on back tightly and secure thread ends. Okay, now it makes sense. See, back here earlier, after gathering and sewing this little piece on, it said hand gather along stitching line. And I thought, but I've just done the gathering. What do you mean? That actually meant gather along that stitching line. Now it makes sense. So that can then get gathered up there. So, okay, that's my next step. I will hand stitch along that stitching line there in preparation for gathering like that. Now it makes sense. Here's the thing with this pattern. It's really hard to visualize until you actually do something on this. That's why it seems so difficult when you first look at the pattern, because it doesn't make sense till you actually see it in 3D and get it, which I hope is going to help, because I'm really not sure what's happening here, what's happening with this edge here and all of that, because I think this gets gathered in with that somehow, but I'm trusting that once we've done this, it will all start to make sense. All right, so I've done the knot into thirds and basted it. Now it suggests on inside, place one end of knot slightly over gathers, sew in place. So what I'm assuming is I need to turn it over and just, which way up do they do it? Probably doesn't really matter, I guess. And sew it into place there and see what happens. I'm just going to, I think, sort of do a type of whip stitch over it, because my understanding is this will all get covered by the grosgrain ribbon, which it instructed me to get. So I think somehow this becomes the main part of the hat somehow. Anyway, we shall see. It's all a mystery. But we trust that it will all work out in the end. And as they say in Best Marigold Hotel, if it's not alright, it's not the end. Basically, we'll keep going with this until it's alright. That's the plan anyway. We'll see how it goes. Right, that should be on there securely enough, so not this. And just thread that in back there. Even though it probably won't get seen, I can't help myself. Okay. And then it tells me to wrap the knot around the upper end of front as shown. So this will be the front. Aha, now then, this way. So that all tucks into there. So I've sewn that on the inside. That's going to go over that. But now it's got to go over that like that. Hang on, so that sits behind that one. seems to be how it's meant to be. But interestingly, that still shows. I wonder if that's correct. Very, very weird. I'm going to play with this and I'll come back to you. So anyway, near as I can tell, that, with that edge like that, the contrast frill that coming through is about right. To the best I can tell, that is the spot to sew it. And that becomes sort of the view that you can see in the picture. Of course, I'm losing light, which is why it's really hard to see what's going on. So I might come back in the morning and start working, because this is my next step, is to steam the buckram. But they don't give you a size and shape of buckram to actually steam at this point, because they just say use a remnant, steam it over a styrofoam ball and a damp washcloth, and then trim it to shape, whatever shape that is. That's going to be another interesting one to do, but yeah, I think I'll leave it, because I think that buckram ends up in this spot here. Probably, I don't know. So yeah, I have just been brought my little glass of rosé. I won't have a whole bottle, I don't think, but it will probably impair the decision making from here on. So till tomorrow. All right, so steaming the buckram. I started off, like they suggested, with a damp washcloth over a styrofoam ball, because I don't have a hat block. And I've got my trusty steam cleaner to steam it up with. I started with that glove thinking it was going to be too hot, but do you know what? My little asbestos fingers seem to cope okay with the steam for the most part. After a while, I just thought that cloth was making it too damp, so I took it off and pinned this buckram directly into the styrofoam to help give it shape. I didn't suggest I do this, it just seemed like a good idea at the time. And it did seem to stretch it well, so I gave it one last good steam and one last really good press down, and then just left it to dry overnight. And it seemed to work, surprisingly. So here we go. I think the buckram's all dry after trying to steam it. I'm hoping it didn't get too wet. It still feels quite stiff around the edges. So here's the thing though, it does not tell you what size to do this, how to cut it out, what shape. It just sort of says trim it down and then make one edge a bit pointed. So what I think I'll do is I'll take it off the ball and then sort of pin this around it, and I'll try and mark the shape and trim it after that and see what happens. I did also read online with other people who've tried to make this that they suggest using a bit more wire and actually shaping around the edge of this before you finish all that off. So I will probably try to do that as well. So let's see how that goes. If we sort of sit that in like that, that's going to get turned over. So what I might do is I'm going to pin it, I think, along that line and trim it after. So let's just do a lot of pinning. Gosh, I don't think I would have wanted to do this any smaller. Wish they'd kind of suggested what size piece to use. Even given us a general pattern piece for it. Might have been really, really helpful, but there we go. No such luck. I'm gonna sort of pull the felt around the curve that I've made, I think. See how that goes. So I think in general I just hack at the buckram now, hand sew it in place, and then hand sew. Well, I couldn't get grey green ribbon in a similar colour, but I could get this twill tape, which I think will do basically the same job of finishing it off and providing an edge. What I may end up wanting to do is put some sort of a comb arrangement in here to hold it in place. I think it suggests just using a hat pin, so I could also do that. So anyway, for now let's try, see if my little scissors will do it. Give this a trim. There we go. So I'd say that's more triangular and rounded, but there we go. That's, be that as it may, that should work. So now, and I think it's time for a change of music for my favourite time, commute sewing. So yeah, I did feel a bit self-conscious about bringing my hat out onto the train, even more so than when I do other sewing, but it makes my daily commute go so much quicker, and it is so much more relaxing than just sitting there worrying about things. The very last thing I did for this hat, rather than put a hair comb in to help hold it into my hair, I did a number of bar tacks that I plan to put some bobby pins through. If you haven't done bar tacks before, they are really quite simple. I take 2 long stitches, basically the length of the bar that I want to make, one on top of the other, and that makes a good 4 pieces of thread that will form the body of the bar tack. I always loosen it just a little bit, like you can see me doing there, to give it a bit of room. And then basically take the thread around, bring the needle under your bar and through the loop you've created with your thread, and that makes a knot. Pull the knot tight, pull it towards you, and then do another one. Bring the thread around, put your needle through the bar, and pull that knot right next to the first one. And just keep on doing it. Fill up that bar with these little knots. And this makes a really good firm bar, and you can use it for things like hooks and eyes when you don't want to use the metal eye, and it certainly works really well for these sorts of little bars where you want to put a bobby pin or something through. Very handy thing to learn if you've never done a bar tack before. Give it a go, it's worth it. And the best thing is finishing it off is easy because basically they're all knots. You don't have to do an extra knot at the end to hold it. Just pass your thread through under it to hide the end of the thread and then snip it off. Bar tack done. And with that, the hat is finished. And here she is in all her glory. Hey, it's not an easy pattern to work with, but the results are amazing when you finally get through there. So thank you for joining me on this somewhat frustrating but rewarding project. Join me for more sewing projects as I look through the 30s and even beyond. And see you soon.